Hey everyone. So next week we're going to the library and we're doing research. And I figured this is a good time for us to kind of have a discussion about primary and secondary sources. And so they are useful tools that help you learn about the past. Now, primary sources can be an object, can be a document, can be a firsthand account of an event or historical time that is being evaluated or is being researched. Now, these things are not as easy to come by, in my opinion, as secondary sources. That doesn't mean that you can't come by them. It's just you're not going to walk upon the Declaration of Independence, actually the Declaration of Independence. You could Google search the Declaration of Independence right now, but you're not going to just walk up to it. So that's just kind of an idea there. Now, primary sources are written, recorded, and created by people who are actually experiencing a historical event in real time. And so because of that, primary sources are often more accurate. It's more accurate to read Anne Frank's diary than it is to talk about what it was like to live in the Holocaust. As somebody, if I started writing about the Holocaust versus Anne Frank writing about the Holocaust, or Abraham Lincoln, if he wrote a journal about living in the Civil War versus me trying to talk about writing during the Civil War. So it's just, if you lived it, it's more accurate because you lived it, right? Right now, if we were to write about living through the coronavirus, what it was like to be at home, to be quarantined for months, we're going to be able to write more accurately about that than somebody who's born 20 years from now and has no idea what it was like to live through that. So primary source examples: diary, newspaper article, political cartoon, letter, speech, photograph, painting or artwork, interview, and material object. All of these things can be considered and are most of the time primary sources. The one caveat here is a newspaper article. A newspaper article can be both. And the reason it can be both is you can have a newspaper article, from 1925 talking about what it was like during 1925. I should have said 1929. 1929, October, Great Depression starts because of the stock market crash. Getting that newspaper is going to tell you everything about what happened and why it happened and how it felt when it happened. But you could also have a newspaper article today because it's an anniversary of the stock market crash, and it's still useful. It's still information, and it still informs you about what happened, but it's not the same as the actual article from that day. So you can have both. Now, with secondary sources, these are sources written by individuals who did not experience a historical event, i.e. me if I were writing about the Civil War. The sources are written about events in the past and are interpreted through the lens of time. And so here, what I want us to do, I want you to pause my video in a second, and I want you to drag where you think each one of these should go. Should they go in the primary section or should they go in the secondary section? Now, what I will tell you is each one of these has a definition: primary, secondary, and then both. And then there is one of these terms that I want to see as well, like one of these automatic photograph textbook that goes in the middle, one. And we will go over these in a second, but I want you to pause and look at them, and then we're going to go over them. Okay, so hopefully you've paused for a long enough period of time. You've gotten it all done. So autobiography, hopefully we put that in primary. Well, you know what I should do before I do that? So they both provide evidence about history. Okay, this is secondary, words written after an event happened. This is direct or first-hand account. A history book and a magazine are not first-hand accounts, right? They have happened after the fact, so they should go over. If I can grab this here, and I'll come back to this side. Now, diary should go here because that was a first-hand account. Autobiography was a first-hand account by the person who lived it. A biography would, of course, be the opposite. That would go over on this side. A speech should go here as well. An interview should go here as well. Newspaper is let's put it in both because it can be in both. Photograph, don't know how to drag, should go there. And then last but not least, textbook. I'm not sure if I missed any, but I don't think I did. Okay, good. That's what it should look like. Hopefully yours looks the same. If not, make sure that it does. Now, moving into bias. We've already kind of talked about bias, but just again, bias is prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. It's favoritism for only one viewpoint. Now, I think you will run more into bias with secondary sources than you do with primary sources, because the primary source doesn't really, a lot of times doesn't really have time to be biased. They're living it. Their life and their views may seem biased, but it's their life and their views. So it's just, you're getting their information from that time period. Actually, I take that back. I would say both things can be biased, because people are naturally biased. And so in a diary or in an autobiography, you're going to see biasy. So I guess you're going to see bias either way. Okay. And it's just being careful with that. So investigating questions to kind of determine that: who wrote the primary source and who is the intended audience, what was the author's purpose or the author's goal, when was it written. And these things are interesting because people had different views in the 1700s and the 1800s and the 1900s today, right? And even in 20-year increments, even in 10-year increments, people in 2010 think differently than people in 2020. People in 1990 thought differently than people in 2000. People in 1960 definitely thought different than people in 1980 or people in 2000. People in the 1900s thought differently than people. Anyways, you get the idea. So when something was written is very key in determining that bias. Where was the author, creator, when they wrote the primary source? Why was it written, created, or recorded? This is kind of a big deal here, especially when it comes to bias. And then, how is it historically significant? Like, you can have something that happened during an event or is related to an event, but it has no real significance, right? You know, if I wrote something on a sticky note, not right now, would it have any real significance 30 years from now? Now, with secondary sources, who is the audience? What is the author's purpose or goal? What types of primary sources has the author used to support their main argument? This is very key. This is why we kind of stay away from Wikipedia, because when we go to Wikipedia, they're not really always using the best sources. People can go there and change things without having any sources whatsoever. And then, how is the author interpreting events? What bias are they adding or taking away? What do you already know about the event that they're adding to the event? So on and so forth. Now, some people might still be taking a test, but I'd love if you could turn and talk to somebody. Which one do you think is better than the other, and why? Now, moving on, you're going to do quest 1. You're just going to type over here, is it a primary or a secondary source? You can write P or S if you want. Now, for this one, you're going to actually find specific examples of primary and secondary sources. Now, for primary sources, you're going to go to this website here. It's linked for you. It is americanhistory.si.edu collections. And if you just come over here to collections and you click search collections, you can filter different things by topic, by object type, by so on and so forth. I think I did, when I was looking, I did military, and you'll just see military collections of things show up. And you just pick one of these. These will be these are all examples of primary sources. I'm aware that you can't actually physically go and put your hands on this source, but George Washington's camp chest, isn't that pretty cool looking? Okay. Now, the second thing you'll do is you'll find a secondary source. Now, with your secondary source, I provided Newsela. This is just a reference that the school approves, and it's easy to get to, and I know that it's vetted. If you can't get into Newsela, or Newsela doesn't have exactly what you're looking for, because if I'm looking at George Washington's chest here, then I'm probably going to also want to have an article that has something to do with the Revolutionary War or just 1775 time period. So just keep that in mind, okay? And you're going to do that a couple of different times here with these sources. Then, what is bias? When have you seen, heard about, or experienced bias? How does bias impact historical accuracy in primary sources? Do you think it's possible for a journalist to be free of bias? Why or why not? These are just opinion questions. Okay, historical examples that include bias, modern examples that include bias. Same idea with the researching places. Go to either here or Newsela, and then talking about different documents and how you think, like, what are the pros and cons of those documents depending on the source. Here, you're going to choose that source again. If your initial source is not a good enough one for you to like research. If you don't get enough information about all of it by clicking on it, then find a different source. But I mean, you get a lot described here. I feel like you're going to get plenty of stuff from this right here. But if not, just find a different source. But again, it's linked to this website. And then same thing with Newsela. Okay, and then that is the end of this. Now there's also a Google Doc version. The Google Doc version I almost always prefer. The only problem with the Google Doc version is this part right here. So you might just want to do this part in the Google Slides and then switch to the Google Doc if you want to do a Google Doc. This is basically like a drawing, so you have to go in there and actually type in there and stuff like that. So long story short, primary and secondary sources, we're going to research in the library next week. If you have any questions, just let me know. And thank you guys for watching. Bye, everyone.